They thought warfare could be civilized, until they met the one species that never forgot how to truly fight. They called it the Terran problem. That's what Ambassador Kalthora of the Vrexian Dominion named it when she first brought the matter before the Galactic Council. The humans had been part of the greater galactic community for only 17 cycles, barely a whisper in the grand timeline of civilized space. And already they were causing complications that threatened to upset the delicate balance of power that had maintained peace for over 3,000 years. I was there that day, sitting in the observation gallery of the Grand Spiral, the massive space station that served as the beating heart of interstellar diplomacy. My name is Zenkar, and I served as a junior diplomatic attaché for the Calvarian Confederacy. I had no idea that I was about to witness the beginning of something that would fundamentally alter our understanding of warfare, of civilization itself, and of the sleeping giant we had so carelessly welcomed into our midst. The Grand Spiral's council chamber was a masterwork of architectural achievement, a spherical room 300 meters in diameter where representatives from 47 species floated in their designated zones, each environment carefully calibrated to their specific atmospheric and gravitational needs. The Matherians drifted in their ammonia clouds. The crystalline choir hummed in their electromagnetic fields. The massive Korthans, bodies resembling living mountains, occupied the lower gravity wells. And there, in a relatively simple oxygen-nitrogen bubble, sat the human delegation, looking almost comically ordinary compared to the exotic array of alien physiology surrounding them. Ambassador Chen of Earth was a middle-aged woman with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that suggested she had seen much in her years. Next to her sat General Marcus Webb, his military uniform crisp and decorated with ribbons whose meaning none of us yet understood. They listened with apparent patience as Ambassador Kalthora made her case. The humans, Kalthora began, her four eyes narrowing with obvious distaste, have refused to sign the Treaty of Civilized Warfare. They claim our terms are, and I quote, unrealistic and divorced from the nature of actual conflict. This is not merely insulting to the thousands of years of diplomatic effort that created these protocols, but it represents a dangerous precedent. The Treaty of Civilized Warfare was, we all believed, the crowning achievement of galactic civilization. It had been drafted after the devastating Korthax Wars, which had claimed billions of lives and rendered 14 worlds uninhabitable. The treaty established clear rules for armed conflict, designated battle zones away from population centers, prohibited weapons that caused unnecessary suffering, mandatory cooling-off periods between engagements, and strict limitations on economic warfare that might harm civilian populations. Under these rules, wars had become almost ritualistic. Conflicts were settled through limited engagements, with casualties numbered in the hundreds rather than millions. It was civilized. It was controlled. It was, we thought, the only way intelligent species should resolve their differences. The treaty has maintained peace and limited suffering for over a millennium. Kalthora continued. Every species that has joined the Galactic Council has signed it. Every species, that is, except humanity. I propose that we give them an ultimatum: sign, or face sanctions and restrictions on their expansion into contested territories. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. The humans were newcomers, after all, barely past their first contact protocols. Who were they to refuse the accumulated wisdom of galactic civilization? Ambassador Chen raised her hand, a simple human gesture that nevertheless commanded attention. The chamber fell silent. Thank you, Ambassador Kalthora, for your concern, Chen began, her voice calm and measured. I want to assure this council that Earth has the utmost respect for galactic law and the efforts that have gone into creating the current peace. However, we cannot in good conscience sign a treaty that we believe is fundamentally flawed. The chamber erupted. Delegates from dozens of species vocalized their outrage in a cacophony of sounds, from the Vrexians' chittering to the Matherians' sonic pulses. High Chancellor Vermix, a being of pure energy who had led the council for centuries, pulsed a calming wave of light that gradually restored order. Ambassador Chen, his translated voice resonated through the chamber. You understand that this is not a small matter. The treaty has saved countless lives. What flaw could possibly justify your refusal? Chen stood, and something in her posture made me uneasy. She looked like someone about to deliver bad news she wished she didn't have to share. "The treaty assumes that all parties in a conflict will honor it," she said. "But what happens when someone doesn't? What happens when an aggressor decides that your rules are just constraints they can exploit? You've created a system of warfare that only works if everyone agrees to play by the rules. You've forgotten what war actually is. And what is war, Ambassador, in humanity's estimation?" Vormix asked. "War is what happens when diplomacy fails," General Webb said, speaking for the first time. His voice was rough, like gravel grinding together. "It's not a game. It's not a ritual. It's what happens when one group decides they're willing to kill to get what they want, and another group decides they're willing to kill to stop them. Everything else is just details, barbaric," Kalthora hissed. "This is exactly why humanity is dangerous. You think like warmongers." "No," Chen said softly. "We think like survivors. Humanity has been fighting wars since before we could write. We've killed each other with sticks and stones, with swords and arrows, with bullets and bombs, and yes, with nuclear fire that nearly destroyed our own world. We know what war costs. We know it better than any of you, precisely because we've never had the luxury of making it civilized." I remember feeling a chill run through my sensory membranes at those words. Around the chamber, I could see similar reactions. The humans spoke of their own history with a darkness that none of us truly understood. We had all had conflicts in our past, but we had evolved beyond them, or so we thought. "We don't seek war," Chen continued, "but we won't sign a treaty that makes us vulnerable by forcing us to fight with one hand, tied behind our back. If conflict comes, we'll do everything we can to avoid it. But if it can't be avoided, we'll do whatever it takes to win. That's not barbarism. That's survival." The vote was called. By an overwhelming majority, the Council decided to impose sanctions on human expansion. No new colonies would be approved. Trade agreements would be reviewed and restricted. Humanity would be isolated until they saw reason. Ambassador Chen simply nodded, thanked the Council for their time, and left with her delegation. I remember watching them go and feeling that something important had just happened. Though I couldn't have said what, that was 3 cycles ago. 3 cycles before the Skrull hegemony invaded the Outer Ring territories, shattering our illusions of eternal peace. The Skrull were a relatively minor power, a species of insectoid warriors from a dense star cluster near the galactic edge. They had been part of the Council for centuries, had signed every treaty, had seemed like model citizens of the galactic community. But their worlds were dying, their sun entering an unstable phase that would make their system uninhabitable within a generation. They had petitioned for emergency colonization rights to uninhabited worlds in the Verdant Cluster, a region rich in habitable planets. The Council, in its wisdom, had denied the request because those worlds had been set aside as nature preserves, protected zones where developing ecosystems could evolve without interference. The Skrull, facing extinction, decided they didn't care about Council law anymore. The first attack came without warning. Skrull warships, massive organic vessels grown from their own biology, emerged from hyperspace around the agricultural world of Nexus Prime. The planet was home to 40 billion Neshans, a peaceful species of herbivores who had never known war. The Thesian Defense Fleet responded according to the Treaty of Civilized Warfare. They hailed the Skrull ships, requesting they proceed to the designated negotiation zone. They transmitted the coordinates of the approved battle area, an asteroid field 3 light minutes from the planet where military disputes could be settled without risk to civilians. The Skrull responded by launching a bombardment on the planet's surface, kinetic weapons, simple rods of dense metal accelerated to relativistic speeds, rained down on Nexus Prime's major cities. The impacts released energy equivalent to nuclear weapons, but left no radiation, no long-term contamination, just craters where cities had been, and hundreds of millions dead in the first hour. Captain Chen fixed him with a stare that could have cut steel. "I mean to win. I mean to stop the Skrull advance. I mean to protect the billions of innocents who are depending on us. If that makes me a monster in your eyes, so be it. You can put me on trial after the war is over. But first, let me win your war for you." She outlined their strategy, and with each point, I felt my sense of reality shift. The humans weren't going to fight battles in designated zones. They weren't going to target only military assets. They weren't going to give quarter or accept surrender until the Skrull were completely broken. The Thesian fleet, still trying to process this violation of every rule they understood, scrambled to respond. They engaged the Skrull ships, but they did so according to their training, according to the treaty. They targeted propulsion systems and weapons arrays, seeking to disable rather than destroy. They maintained communication channels, trying to negotiate even as their world burned below them. The Skrull had no such limitations. They had come to take the world, and if that meant exterminating everyone on it, so be it. Within 3 days, Nexus Prime fell silent. 40 billion voices ended. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. The holographic displays showed the devastation on Nexus Prime, the massive craters, the cities reduced to ash, the bodies floating in orbit. It was the worst atrocity the galaxy had seen in 1,000 years. This cannot stand. High Chancellor Vermix declared. The Skrull hegemony has violated the most sacred laws of civilization. They must be stopped. Stopped how? Someone asked. I think it was Ambassador Voronel of the Kelvrian Confederacy, my own government's representative. That's when we all realized the problem. We had a treaty that governed warfare, but it only worked if both sides followed it. The Skrull weren't following it. They were fighting the way humanity had described war, total, ruthless, aimed at complete victory by any means necessary, and we had no idea how to respond. The Council assembled a coalition fleet, the largest military force gathered in centuries. 73 capital ships, thousands of smaller vessels, drawn from 20 different species. It was an armada that should have been unstoppable. They engaged the Skrull fleet at the Varaxis system, where intelligence suggested the Skrull were staging for another invasion. The coalition forces, under the command of Fleet Admiral Kralvix of the Vrexian Dominion, approached the Skrull positions with confidence. They outnumbered the enemy 3-1. Their technology was superior. Their crews were well trained. The battle lasted 6 hours. The coalition fleet was destroyed. Admiral Kralvix, in his final transmission before his flagship was consumed by a biological weapon, the Skrull had deployed, described the horror of fighting an enemy that refused to follow the rules. The Skrull used tactics considered criminal by galactic law. They disguised military vessels as medical ships, then struck when coalition forces hesitated to fire. They deployed chemical weapons that dissolved ship hulls and crews together. They targeted life support systems specifically to kill crews even when ships could have been saved. They showed no mercy to damaged vessels attempting to retreat. They fight like animals. Kralvix said in his last message, "We tried to be civilized, and they butchered us for it. We don't know how to fight a war like this. May the ancestors forgive us. We've forgotten how." In the aftermath of Varaxis, the Galactic Council faced a terrible truth. The Skrull were advancing through the Outer Rim, taking world after world. Civilian populations that resisted were exterminated. Fleets that tried to stop them were destroyed. And we, with all our technology, and our civilization and our treaties, were helpless. Worlds began to fall with terrifying speed. The Skrull didn't stop to occupy or govern. They simply cleared each world of its existing population and moved their own people in. It was efficient, brutal, and utterly effective. Refugee fleets clogged the space lanes. Trillions displaced, billions dead, and more dying every day. The Council met in continuous session, desperately trying to find a solution. Some suggested we adopt the Skrull's tactics, fight them the way they were fighting us. But every proposal was met with the same objection. We couldn't do those things and still call ourselves civilized. Our entire society was built on laws and rules and the belief that there were some lines you simply didn't cross. That's when Ambassador Chen made her proposal. She appeared before the Council not with a hologram but in person, having traveled to the Grand Spiral from Earth aboard a human warship that had been conducting what they called readiness exercises near human space. The sanctions against humanity were still in place, but no one suggested she leave. We were desperate enough to listen to anyone. "You need help," she said simply. "Earth is prepared to offer it. And what would you ask in return?" High Chancellor Vermix asked warily. What price does humanity demand for its assistance? The same thing we asked for before, Chen replied. Recognition that warfare is not something that can be civilized. That when you're fighting for survival, the only rule that matters is that you survive. You let us fight our way, without restrictions, without judgment, without trying to impose your treaties on how we conduct military operations. You're asking for a license to commit atrocities, Kelthora said, though her voice lacked its usual venom. The Vrexian had lost her home world to the Skrull advance just days earlier. No, General Webb said. And once again he was there beside Ambassador Chen. We're asking for permission to win. There's a difference. How can you be sure you'll win? Vermix asked. We've thrown everything we have at the Skrull. Our best fleets, our most advanced weapons. They've destroyed us at every turn. What makes humanity think they can succeed where we've failed? Webb looked at Chen, who nodded slightly. He turned back to the council, and in his eyes I saw something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't anger or hatred. It was calculation, the look of someone running numbers, measuring odds, planning moves on a board the rest of us couldn't see. Because, Webb said slowly, humanity has a weapon you don't have. A weapon we've spent our entire history refining. A weapon that terrifies us, that we've tried to move beyond, but that we've never quite been able to put away. What weapon? Vermix asked. Webb's expression didn't change. Us, we're the weapon. When humanity goes to war, truly goes to war, we become something different, something you've never had to be. You want to know what happens when we go to war? You're about to find out. The vote was close, but desperation won. Humanity was given command of military operations in the Outer Rim, with full authority to conduct the war as they saw fit. No restrictions, no oversight, no rules except one: stop the Skrull. I was assigned as a liaison to the human fleet, along with representatives from 6 other species. We were there to observe, to learn, and if I'm honest, to make sure the humans didn't become the very monsters we were trying to stop. The human fleet was smaller than I expected. Only 37 ships, ranging from massive carriers to smaller vessels they called destroyers and frigates. They had brought their entire deep space navy, every ship that could make the journey from Earth to the front lines. But as I toured the lead vessel, a carrier called the USS Indomitable, I began to understand that we had made a terrible mistake, not in trusting the humans, but in thinking we understood what we were unleashing. The ship was a marvel of brutal efficiency. Every system, every design choice, every element was built for one purpose: to kill as effectively as possible. There were no amenities, no decorative elements, nothing that didn't contribute to the ship's function as a weapon of war. The crew moved with a precision that seemed almost mechanical, but their eyes held something that disturbed me. They looked eager, hungry even, in a way I'd never seen in any military personnel from any species. Captain Sarah Chen, no relation to the ambassador, gave us a briefing in the ship's war room. She was young for a ship's captain by human standards, perhaps 40 cycles, with close-cropped black hair and a scar that ran from her left temple to her jaw. We've studied the Skrull tactics, she said, gesturing to holographic displays showing battle reports. They're effective because they're ruthless, and because you haven't been willing to match their ruthlessness. That ends now. Surely you don't mean to commit atrocities? Voronel, my own ambassador, asked nervously. They've shown us what kind of war they want to fight, Captain Chen said. We're going to give them exactly that, and they're going to learn why humanity spent 10,000 years being very, very good at killing each other. They're going to learn what it means to fight a species that crawled up from the bottom of the food chain, that survived ice ages and plagues and wars that make the current situation look like a minor skirmish. The first engagement came 3 days later. The Skrull had taken the industrial world of Corvex 7 and were establishing it as a forward base. Intelligence suggested they had positioned 12 warships in orbit and begun transferring their civilian population to the surface. More than 1 billion Skrull refugees from their dying worlds. According to the Treaty of Civilized Warfare, such a world would be considered off-limits for attack. Civilian populations were protected. We would need to arrange a negotiated battle, give time for evacuation, establish proper rules of engagement. The humans launched their attack within hours of arriving in the system. I watched from the observation deck of the Indomitable as human fighters, small craft piloted by single individuals, swarmed toward the Skrull fleet. Behind them came missiles, thousands of them, each one carrying multiple warheads with yields large enough to crack continents. The Skrull fleet scrambled to respond, but they had made a critical error. They had assumed the humans would follow the rules. The first missiles struck before the Skrull ships could raise full defensive shields. The warheads were what the humans called nuclear weapons, devices that released energy through atomic fission and fusion, the same kind of weapon that had nearly destroyed Earth in their ancient past. We had banned such weapons 3,000 years ago as being too terrible to use. The humans had brought thousands of them, that the Skrull ships died in spheres of nuclear fire. Their organic hulls, so resistant to conventional weapons, couldn't withstand temperatures that rivaled the core of a star. Within minutes, the orbital space around Korvax 7 was filled with debris and radiation. My God, Voronil whispered beside me. They're not stopping. He was right. The human fighters were diving toward the planet's surface, where Skrull ground forces were scrambling to organize a defense. I thought surely Captain Chen would halt the attack now. There were billions of Skrull civilians on that world, refugees, non-combatants. But I was thinking like someone who believed in civilized warfare. The humans had warned us. They had told us what war really was. The bombardment of Korvax 7 lasted for 3 hours. When it was over, the world was burning. Not destroyed, not lifeless, but burning. The humans had targeted every Skrull settlement, every military installation, every ship trying to evacuate from the surface. They had been thorough, efficient, and absolutely merciless. And then they broadcast a message on every frequency, in every language spoken in the galaxy. This is General Marcus Webb of Earth to all Skrull forces. You wanted total war. You wanted to fight without rules, without mercy, without civilization. We are granting your wish. From this moment forward, any world you occupy will be considered a military target. Any ship carrying Skrull will be considered hostile. Any force that resists will be destroyed utterly. You have one chance, and one chance only, complete and unconditional surrender. Return to your home systems. Remove your populations from every world you've taken by force. Do this within 30 standard days, or we will come for you. And we will not stop until your entire species is extinct. The silence in the observation deck was absolute. We had asked the humans to help us. We had given them permission to fight their way. But none of us had truly understood what that meant. Captain Chen found me hours later, as I sat alone in my quarters, trying to process what I had witnessed. She carried 2 glasses and a bottle of something amber-colored that humans called whiskey. You're wondering if we're monsters, she said, sitting down without invitation and pouring us both a drink. I accepted the glass, though I wasn't sure I could drink it. Are you? She took a long sip, staring into the liquid. Maybe. Probably, but we're monsters who get the job done. You want to know the truth? Every human who joins the military knows what we are. We know our history. We know that our species has spent more time at war than at peace. We know that we're capable of atrocities that would make the Skrull look merciful. Then why do it? Why become weapons? Because someone has to, she said simply. Because the universe isn't a civilized place, no matter how much you want it to be. Because there are always going to be Skrulls, species that decide they don't care about your rules and your treaties. And when they come, when they're murdering your people and taking your worlds, you need someone who knows how to fight back. You need someone who's willing to be the monster so you don't have to be. She finished her drink and stood to leave, but paused at the door. The Skrull won't surrender. They can't. Their worlds are dying, and they've committed too many atrocities to be forgiven. They'll fight to the last. And that means we'll have to kill them to the last. I'm sorry you have to see it. I'm sorry we have to do it. But I'm not sorry that we can. Because if we couldn't, if humanity couldn't be this weapon you've unleashed, then everyone the Skrull have killed would just be the beginning. She left me alone with my drink and my thoughts. And in the distance, through the viewport, I could see Korvax 7 still burning. The humans had been at war for less than a week. And already they had killed more Skrull than had died in the entire previous conflict. And this, I realized with growing horror, was just the beginning. We had asked the humans what happens when they go to war. Now we were learning the answer. The Skrull did not surrender. We had all known they wouldn't. But some part of me had hoped that seeing what humanity was capable of would be enough. That the destruction of Korvax the Seventh would serve as a warning that would end the bloodshed. I was still thinking like a civilized being. The Skrull were fighting for their species' survival. And the humans, well, the humans were finally doing what they had been engineered by millions of years of evolution to do. The second battle came at the Thresh system, where the Skrull had concentrated a massive fleet, nearly 200 warships, protecting a cluster of worlds they had taken early in their campaign. Intelligence suggested they were fortifying the system as a permanent stronghold, a place from which they could continue their expansion even if humanity pushed them back elsewhere. The human fleet arrived in force, all 37 ships, but this time they had brought something else. Something that made my blood run cold when I first saw the specifications. They called them relativistic kill vehicles, and they were exactly what they sounded like. Massive chunks of dense metal, accelerated to 99% of the speed of light. At such speeds, even a small mass carried enough kinetic energy to shatter a continent. The humans had built 20 of them, each one weighing several thousand tons. Each one aimed at a different target in the Thresh system. They had launched them days before arriving, letting them build up speed in the depths of interstellar space where no one would detect them. Until it was too late. Admiral James Hawkins, the overall commander of human forces, called us to the war room of his flagship, the USS Retribution. He was an older man, perhaps 60 cycles by human reckoning, with white hair and eyes that seemed to have seen everything terrible the universe had to offer, and accepted it as normal. The Skrull have 100 ships, he said, gesturing to the tactical display. If we fought a conventional engagement, even with our advantages, we'd lose at least a third of our fleet. That's unacceptable. So we're not fighting a conventional engagement. He manipulated the display, showing the trajectories of the relativistic kill vehicles. They were aimed at the major Skrull installations in the system, the shipyards orbiting Thresh 2, the military command center on Thresh 4, the resource extraction operations in the asteroid belt. And for hours, Hawkins continued, these projectiles will impact their targets. The Skrull will have approximately 15 minutes of warning. Once their sensors detect the incoming mass, that's not enough time to evacuate, not enough time to establish adequate defenses. The impacts will be catastrophic. Admiral, I said, my voice shaking, there are billions of Skrull on those worlds. Not all of them are military. There are civilians, children. They brought those civilians there, Hawkins interrupted. They settled them on worlds they stole after murdering the previous inhabitants. Every Skrull in this system is here because their species chose conquest over diplomacy. I'm not happy about what we're about to do, Attaché Zenkar. But I'm not going to apologize for it either. War is horror. The Skrull started this horror. We're going to end it. Vornal, standing beside me, looked like he might be sick. His species, the Kelvrians, were herbivores, pacifists by nature. Watching the humans operate was devastating his worldview in ways I don't think he ever recovered from. This is genocide, he whispered. You're committing genocide. No, Hawkins said flatly. Genocide is what we'd be doing if we were targeting their home worlds, killing them for the sake of killing them. This is military action against a hostile force occupying stolen territory. Every Skrull in this system is here as part of their military expansion. They've made themselves combatants. Don't confuse warfare with genocide just because the scale is large. The scale? Vornal's voice rose. You're about to kill billions. Yes, Hawkins said, and his voice carried a weight that silenced the room. I am. I'll carry that weight for the rest of my life. Every one of those deaths will be on my conscience. But you know what weight I'm not willing to carry? The weight of failing to stop them. The weight of letting the Skrull continue their advance because I was too squeamish to do what needed to be done. The weight of explaining to the next billion victims why I chose the lives of enemy combatants over the lives of innocents they would have killed. The impacts came exactly on schedule. From the Retribution's observation deck, we watched the sensor feeds as chunks of metal moving at near light speed struck their targets. The explosions were visible from light minutes away. Massive flashes of energy as kinetic force was converted to heat and light and devastation. The shipyards of Thresh II simply ceased to exist. One moment there were massive orbital structures, where the Skrull were building their next-generation warships. The next moment there was an expanding cloud of superheated plasma. The military command center on Thresh IV was hit by a projectile that punched through the planet's crust and into the mantle. The resulting shockwave triggered volcanic eruptions across an entire hemisphere. The Skrull fleet, seeing what had happened, broke formation and attempted to scatter. That's when the human fleet struck. Fighters swarmed from the carriers, each one carrying missiles with fusion warheads. The destroyers and frigates moved within human precision, their targeting systems locking onto Skrull ships with mechanical efficiency. The humans fought like they had done this a million times before, and in a way, they had. Every simulation, every training exercise, every lesson learned from 10,000 years of human warfare was being applied with devastating effect. The Battle of Thresh lasted 9 hours. When it was over, the Skrull had lost 173 ships. The humans had lost 2 frigates, both of which had sacrificed themselves to protect damaged larger vessels. The human doctrine, we learned, included the concept of acceptable losses, something we had tried to engineer out of warfare. They had calculated exactly how many ships they were willing to lose to achieve their objective, and they had stayed within those parameters. That it was the most horrifying display of clinical, calculated violence I had ever witnessed, and it was only the beginning. Over the next 30 days, the human fleet moved through the outer rim like a scythe through wheat. They hit 12 more Skrull-occupied systems, each time using different tactics, different weapons, different approaches. They seemed to have an endless arsenal of ways to kill, refined over millennia of practice. At the Vexus Nebula, they used biological weapons, engineered viruses that targeted Skrull physiology specifically, leaving other species untouched. Within weeks, the Skrull garrison was decimated by plague. At the Corvin Belt, they used nanomachines, microscopic machines that infiltrated Skrull ships and systematically dismantled them from the inside out. At the Thresha colony, they simply cut off all supply lines and waited, laying siege to the system until the Skrull were forced to surrender or starve. But it was at the Battle of Nexus Prime that I truly understood what Captain Chen had meant when she said humanity becomes something different when they go to war. Nexus Prime was a fortress world, one of the Skrull's most heavily defended positions. They had 30 billion population on the surface, protected by orbital defense platforms, minefields, automated weapon systems, and a fleet of 90 warships. Intelligence suggested it would take months to crack, and thousands of ships. The humans took it in 6 hours, and they only needed 1 ship to do it. The USS Prometheus was a vessel we hadn't seen before, smaller than the carriers, but built with a singular purpose. It was, for lack of a better term, a planet killer. Not in the sense that it could destroy a world, though it probably could, but in the sense that it was designed to make any planet's surface uninhabitable. Admiral Hawkins gave the Skrull one final chance to surrender. He broadcast his message directly to the Skrull High Command. Wherever they were hiding, evacuate Nexus Prime within 24 hours, or face consequences that would make the previous battles look merciful. The Skrull, emboldened by their defensive positions, refused. They sent a message back filled with their clicking, chittering language that translated roughly to, "Come and take it if you dare." The humans dared. The Prometheus moved into position at the edge of the system, far beyond the range of any Skrull weapons. It began to spin, slowly at first, then faster until its hull was blurring. And then it fired. What emerged from the ship was unlike any weapon I had ever seen. It looked like a beam of pure darkness, a stream of something that seemed to absorb light rather than emit it. The beam struck Nexus Prime's atmosphere and simply vanished into it, and for a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the planet began to die. The weapon, we learned later, was something called a Grey Goo scenario, an old human nightmare turned into reality. Nanomachines, self-replicating machines so small they couldn't be seen, programmed to disassemble any complex organic molecules they encountered, and use the raw materials to make more of themselves. The swarm spread across Nexus Prime like a wave of death. Vegetation turned to gray dust. Animals collapsed and crumbled. Skrull by the billions tried to flee, tried to find shelter, tried to fight back against an enemy they couldn't see. But there was no defense against something that attacked at the molecular level. Within 3 hours, the surface of Nexus Prime was gray and lifeless. Not burned, not bombed, simply converted into raw materials and more nanomachines. The orbital defenses, deprived of commands from the surface, were easy prey for the human fleet that followed. The Skrull warships, seeing what had happened to their fortress world, broke and ran. "This has to stop," Voronil said to me that night. We were in my quarters on the Retribution, drinking the human whiskey that had become a necessity for getting through each day. "This isn't war anymore. This is extinction. It's what they warned us about," I said quietly. "They told us what would happen if they went to war their way. We just didn't believe them. We have to tell the Council. We have to stop this before humanity becomes a threat worse than the Skrull." "Do you know how many lives the humans have saved?" I asked. The Skrull were killing billions. They were on track to conquer half the Outer Rim. In 6 weeks, humanity has stopped their advance completely. The Skrull are retreating. The refugee flows have stopped. Worlds that were about to fall are now safe. At what cost? Voronil demanded. "How many Skrull have died? How many billions have the humans killed?" "All of them combatants," I said, though the words tasted like ash. "All of them on worlds the Skrull had stolen. All of them part of the military expansion that started this war. You're defending them now? After what we've seen?" "I'm not defending them," I said. "I'm understanding them. There's a difference." The truth was, I had been spending more time with the humans, trying to understand how they could be so normal, so personable, so kind in casual interaction, and yet transform into such efficient killers when they went into battle. I had dinner with crew members who laughed at jokes and showed me pictures of their families. I watched them play games in their recreation areas, saw them fall in love, witnessed them mourn when one of their own died. They weren't monsters. That was the most terrifying thing about them. They were just people, ordinary people who happened to be extraordinarily good at warfare because they're entire evolutionary. History had required it. Captain Chen had invited me to join her for what humans called a poker night, a card game that involved betting and bluffing and reading your opponents. As we played, I asked her the question that had been haunting me. "How do you live with it? The killing?" She looked at her cards, then at me, and I saw something in her eyes that I hadn't noticed before. Pain, deep, profound pain that she carried like a weight. "We don't live with it," she said quietly. "We die with it." Every human who goes to war knows that part of them is going to die. The part that believes the universe is kind, that believes people are fundamentally good, that believes there are some lines that can't be crossed. We kill that part of ourselves so that we can do what needs to be done. And when the war is over, we try to rebuild it, but it's never quite the same. "That sounds like a terrible price to pay." "It is," she agreed. "But it's better than the alternative. If we couldn't pay that price, if we couldn't become what we need to become, then species like the Skrull would just keep taking and taking until there was nothing left. Someone has to be willing to fight back with everything they have. That's humanity's curse and our gift. We can be the monster that fights monsters." The final battle came at the Skrull home worlds. Their sun was dying, just as they had claimed, entering a red giant phase that would consume their inner planets within a generation. They had 3 inhabited worlds in the habitable zone, and those worlds held the remaining 20 billion Skrull, who hadn't been part of the military expansion. The human fleet arrived in force. All 35 remaining ships rayed in a blockade formation around the system. Admiral Hawkins made one final broadcast to the Skrull hegemony. "Your military forces have been defeated. Your occupied territories have been liberated. You have one choice remaining: surrender, submit to galactic law, and accept relocation to designated worlds that will be provided for your species' survival, or face extinction. You have 72 hours to decide." I expected them to surrender. They had lost everything. Their fleet was destroyed. Their military was broken. Their expansion had failed. There was no logical reason to continue fighting. But I was still thinking like someone who believed in civilization. The Skrull had gone too far. They had committed too many atrocities. They knew that even if they surrendered, They would face trials, punishment, possibly the end of their species through legal means rather than military ones. After 72 hours, the Skrull High Command sent their response: "We will never surrender to lesser beings. If we are to die, we will die as warriors, not as criminals begging for mercy." Admiral Hawkins called me to his ready room. He looked older than he had 6 weeks ago, the weight of command aging him in ways that went beyond mere time. "I need you to witness what comes next," he said. "I need someone to tell the galaxy what happened here and why, Admiral. You can't be planning total extermination," he said flatly. "Yes, that's exactly what I'm planning. The Skrull have made their choice. They've chosen death over surrender, and I'm going to grant them that choice. Because if I don't, if I show mercy now, then every other species that decides to go on a rampage of conquest will think they can push until the last moment and then surrender to escape consequences." "You're talking about genocide," I said. "Real genocide. Not military action, not collateral damage. The deliberate extermination of an entire species." "Yes," Hawkins said, and there were tears in his eyes. "I am, and it's going to haunt me until the day I die. But it has to be done, because the lesson has to be absolute. The galaxy has to understand that there are consequences for what the Skrull did, that you can't murder billions and then cry mercy when you lose. There has to be another way." I pleaded. "If you can think of one." "I'm listening," Hawkins said, "because I don't want to do this. I don't want to be the man who ends an entire species. But what I want doesn't matter. What matters is stopping this from ever happening again." I had no answer. There was no answer. The Skrull had played their hand and lost, and now they faced a dealer who didn't believe in second chances. The bombardment began at dawn, synchronized across all 3 Skrull homeworlds. The humans used everything: nuclear weapons to shatter the surface infrastructure, kinetic strikes to crack the crust, biological weapons to ensure nothing could survive, and finally, the gray goo, the nanomachini swarms that would reduce everything to base elements. It took 6 days for the Skrull homeworlds to fall silent, 6 days of continuous bombardment, 6 days of watching an entire species die. 20 billion souls ended because they had refused to surrender, refused to accept consequences for their actions, refused to believe that the humans would actually follow through on their threat. When it was over, Admiral Hawkins made one final broadcast to the galaxy. "This is Admiral James Hawkins of Earth. To the Galactic Council, the Skrull hegemony has been eliminated as a military threat. Their occupied worlds have been liberated. Their fleets have been destroyed. And yes, their species has been rendered extinct. I take full responsibility for this action. I understand that it violates every principle of civilized warfare. I understand that many will call me a monster, a war criminal, a genocidaire. They're not wrong." He paused, and I could see the weight of what he had done crushing him. "But I also understand that what we've done here will echo through galactic history. Every species that considers conquest will remember the Skrull. Every would-be aggressor will remember what happened when they pushed humanity too far. And maybe, just maybe, that will prevent the next war. Maybe some species that might have followed the Skrull's path will look at the dead worlds and decide that diplomacy is better. If that happens, if we've bought peace with the Skrull's blood, then perhaps we can live with what we've done. Humanity didn't want this war." He continued, "We tried to warn you. We tried to tell you that your civilized warfare was a luxury that only worked when everyone agreed to play by the rules. You didn't listen, and when the Skrull proved us right, you came to us for help. We gave you that help, and we did it our way. The way we've fought wars since we lived in caves and threw rocks at predators. The way we've fought since we were the prey and had to become the hunters to survive. Now you know humanity's darkest weapon. It's not our technology. It's not our ships or our bombs or our nanomachines. It's us. It's our willingness to do whatever it takes to survive. Our ability to become monsters when we have to, and to live with the consequences afterward. That's what happens when humanity goes to war. We become death, destroyer of worlds, and we don't stop until the threat is eliminated." The transmission ended, and in the silence that followed, I realized that the galaxy would never be the same. The humans had shown us something we had forgotten in our 3,000 years of civilized peace. That true victory in warfare requires the willingness to go further than your enemy, To be more ruthless, more determined, more willing to sacrifice your own humanity to protect those who depend on you. The Galactic Council convened 1 week later. The sanctions against humanity were lifted. The Treaty of Civilized Warfare was revised to include an annex acknowledging that some conflicts could not be fought under the treaty's restrictions. Humanity was granted a permanent seat on the Council and was designated as the Warden species, responsible for military action against existential threats to galactic civilization. Ambassador Chen appeared before the Council, and I noticed that General Webb and Admiral Hawkins were not with her. They had both resigned their commissions, choosing to face courts-martial on Earth for their actions during the war. The trials would eventually clear them of wrongdoing, ruling that they had acted within the authorization given by the Council. But both men would spend the rest of their lives as controversial figures, celebrated as heroes by some and condemned as monsters by others. The Council has asked me to explain what happened, Chen said, to help you understand how humanity could do what we did. But I think you already understand. You just don't want to admit it. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes or optical sensors or whatever sensory organs each species used to perceive the world. Every species here has the capacity for violence. Every one of you has fought wars in your past. But somewhere along the line, you decided that you could transcend that violence, that you could make warfare civilized and controlled. And in doing so, you made yourselves vulnerable to anyone who didn't share that belief. Humanity never forgot what we are, she continued. We're predators pretending to be civilized. We're killers who learned to shake hands instead of throats. We're monsters who built a society on top of our monstrosity and hoped we'd never have to let the monster out again. But we never threw away the key to that cage because we knew, somewhere deep down, that someday we might need it. The scrawl needed to be stopped, Chen said. They were murdering billions. They were on track to conquer half the galaxy, and your civilized warfare couldn't stop them because you had forgotten how to fight a real war. So you called us. You opened the cage and let the monster out, and now you're horrified by what you saw. But here's the thing you need to understand, she said, and her voice carried a weight that silenced even the whispers that had been spreading through the chamber. That monster is back in its cage now. We did what needed to be done, and now we're going back to being the friendly, helpful humans you thought you knew. We'll trade with you, laugh with you, share culture and science and art with you. We'll be your friends and your allies. But never, ever forget what you saw. Never forget what humanity is capable of when we go to war. Because if you ever need us to open that cage again, we will. That's our gift to the galaxy. That's our burden. We'll be the weapon you point at your enemies, the monster you unleash when civilization fails, the darkness you use to fight darkness. Just remember, Chen finished, her voice dropping to almost a whisper, that when you stare into the abyss long enough, the abyss stares back, and humanity has been staring into that abyss for our entire history. We know what's down there. We've made peace with it. The question is, can you? She sat down, and the council chamber remained silent for a long moment. Then High Chancellor Vermix spoke, his energy form pulsing with what I had learned to recognize as sadness. We asked for a weapon, he said, and humanity gave us exactly that. May the ancestors forgive us for what we've unleashed. 3 cycles have passed since the end of the Skrull War. The galaxy has settled into an uneasy peace. The human fleet remains on alert, a constant reminder of what waits in reserve if anyone decides to follow the Skrull's path. Humanity has become the galaxy's enforcer, the species we call when diplomacy fails and warfare becomes necessary. I still serve as a liaison to the human military, though I've been promoted several times. I've watched humanity settle into their role as Galactic Warden. They train other species' militaries, teach them tactics and strategies, share their military technology, but they always hold something back, always keep their most devastating weapons in reserve. Captain Chen once told me that humanity's greatest fear isn't that they'll lose a war. It's that they'll enjoy winning. That's somewhere deep in their genetic code. There's still a predator that remembers when hunting was survival and killing was necessary. That every human carries inside them the potential to become what they became during the Skrull War. We're not proud of what we did, she said to me once during one of our late-night conversations. But we're not ashamed either. We did what needed to be done. We saved trillions of lives by ending billions of others. The math is simple, even if the morality is complex. Do you think you'll ever have to do it again? I asked. She looked out at the stars, at the vast expanse of space that held so many species, so many potential threats, so much unknown. I hope not, she said. But if we do, we will. Because that's what humanity is. That's our darkest weapon, our greatest strength, our most terrible burden. We're the species that can become monsters to fight monsters. We're the ones who can stare into the abyss and not blink. And when the abyss stares back, I said, "Understanding now, you stare harder." She smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. Exactly. Because someone has to. Someone has to be willing to go into the darkness so others can stay in the light. That's humanity's gift to the galaxy. That's what happens when we go to war. I often think about those words now, especially on nights when I can't sleep, when I remember the gray worlds and the silent ships and the billions of lives ended in nuclear fire. The humans saved us. They stopped the Skrull and prevented countless deaths. But they also showed us something about the nature of civilization that we had forgotten. That peace is not the absence of violence, but the decision to control it. And that sometimes the only way to protect civilization is to become temporarily uncivilized. The Galactic Council learned a hard lesson during the Skrull War. We learned that our treaties and our rules and our civilized warfare were luxuries that depended on everyone agreeing to play by the rules. We learned that when someone decides to ignore those rules, you need someone who remembers how to fight dirty, how to fight for keeps, how to fight to win at any cost. We learned that humanity is that someone, and we learned to be grateful for it, even as we fear it, because somewhere in the depths of human space, on worlds orbiting yellow stars, there are shipyards building weapons we can't imagine, scientists developing technologies we don't want to know about, and soldiers training for wars we hope will never come. There are humans who have made peace with the monster inside them, who have learned to live with the darkness, who stand ready to become death incarnate if the galaxy needs them. They are humanity's darkest weapon, and they are our greatest hope, because when the next threat comes, when some new species decides that conquest is easier than diplomacy, when civilization fails and warfare becomes necessary, we know what to do. We know who to call. We know who will answer. And we know what happens when humanity goes to war. They win. Whatever it takes, whatever it costs, whatever they have to become, they win. This is the truth that the Galactic Council doesn't speak aloud. The reality we dance around in diplomatic language and carefully worded treaties. Humanity is the weapon we keep in reserve, the option we hope we never have to exercise, the darkness we unleash only when all other options have failed. And in the quiet moments, when I'm alone with my thoughts, I find myself grateful that humanity is on our side, because I've seen what they're capable of. I've seen what happens when they go to war, and I never, ever want to be on the receiving end of it. The humans call it their darkest weapon. The rest of us call it salvation. Both descriptions are accurate. Both are terrifying. And both are necessary in a universe that is not as civilized as we once believed. May we never need to unleash it again. But may it always be ready if we do. That is humanity's gift. That is their curse. That is what happens when they go to war. And now you know too.